Good evening, Chelsea fans. The mood is certainly dark as Chelsea's rotten run in the league extends at the hands of Man United. We'll look back on yet another bleak week for Chelsea and take a step back and look closer at Alejandro Garnacho, the man of the moment for all the wrong reasons, who produced one of the worst performances ever known to man by a professional footballer. We'll turn our attention then to Tuesday night's action in the league with another daunting fixture away to Brighton, who will certainly be looking to register a domestic double over Chelsea. And we're excited to be joined for this section by Jack Stephenson of the Seagulls Social Podcast for the opposition view. Let's jump into it. Chelsea nil, Man United 1. From bad to worse to even worse on Saturday night, as Chelsea make it 4 Premier League defeats on the bounce and now 0 goals registered since the 4th of March with that 4-1 win away to Villa. The wheels have well and truly fallen off. Talk us through this latest tragedy, George.
We built this one as must win in the preview, a 6 pointer at the business end of the season, any chance of grasping Champions League football. And fortune dictated that all four senior centre backs were unavailable for United. We had positive PR spins in the week pertaining to Cole, Enzo, and Caicedo with the new contract. We had Spurs spursing once again in the build-up. And you're looking at a Saturday night, 8 p.m. kickoff, under the lights, big game, conditions in which we've rallied on many occasions in recent years. And yet we limp to a 1-0 defeat, allowing that makeshift, if you can even call it that, centre-back pairing of Mazraoui and Heaven keep yet another clean sheet to continue this hellish run. So external factors were primed, as just discussed, but crucially, we now just find ourselves in the most perfect of storms. You had the ownership process that I'm sure we'll touch upon preceding the fixture. You had that unwanted record that rabbit in the headlines Liam Rosenior's now resided over. And I have to confess, my heart sank when João Pedro was absent from that matchday lineup. So you had yet another high-profile mystery matchday absence at the last hour. This has happened on countless occasions. But ultimately, we were looking at League One Liam, or alternatively known now as one league goal Liam, leading the line. And to add insult to injury, we see yet another injury with the electric Estevao also departing just 15 minutes in. We had a flat opening to the game, but just those two Brazilians suddenly absent from the lineup, you really started to question where that goal was going to come from. Cole Palmer increasingly looking miles off the pace. Garnacho's introduction, which merits a whole section upcoming. Enzo reinstated, a couple of nice touches here and there, did flash one of the post, but ultimately not grasping the net or not gripping the game. It just felt like, yes, we held possession, but just looked ultimately toothless. Typically, United capitalise. Wes Fofana off the pitch, classic fashion. And you see Bruno peeling off Garnacho to square for Cunha in inexplicably acres of space to slide home. The reaction in the crowd, the fan base, was just one of pure apathy. I mentioned it was a Saturday night game under the lights, but it just felt flat from the get-go. And this goal just reinstated a very familiar feeling. So while
George,
there were sort of halves and puffs efforts in that second half to turn the tide, hit the bar a couple of times with some decent crosses from Neto, ultimately just looked toothless. And I think that double sub from Liam Rosenior, Achampong and Chalobah, two centre-backs on in the 80th minute, chasing a game in which not only did we need an equaliser, we needed all 3 points. Told you everything you needed to know.
you touched on it already, George, but pre-match the clear and palpable dissatisfaction from not just Chelsea fans on the King's Road, but Strasbourg fans joining forces to make their feelings known. And on the pitch, you had these sort of public displays of dissatisfaction as well from players, in particular Wesley Fofana and Enzo Fernandez, who we've covered at length, completely filled with their own issues there, but all of this signals just this looming dread for Chelsea and in all walks of the club essentially. Starting with the most obvious question, do you think this is the end of Chelsea's pursuit of Champions League, Europa League football, and thereby signalling the end of Liam Rossinia's brief stint as a Chelsea manager?
I think the league prospects securing Champions League via top five places is all but gone now. The Liverpool and Villa results all but confirm that. And ultimately, we don't deserve Champions League football. We discussed last week, potentially in the context of this perfect storm, the dissatisfaction with Blueco and their current model, that almost tanking, dropping out of Europe altogether may well be the antidote, the long-term medicine that we need to regroup and move forward with a different strategy. But as a fan, I want to win that FA Cup. Looking increasingly unlikely, but it has to now be all eggs in that FA Cup basket. Chance of glory for those players, irrespective of if their futures lie elsewhere. I'd almost say, rather cynically, that Europa League qualification via the FA Cup is actually a slight detractor to that trophy for me. So I'd almost prefer to win the FA Cup but not play Europa League football next year to finally regroup, take stock, reconfigure, and give a league run a full attention. We've seen United themselves benefit from the lack of fixture congestion. Well overdue that we put together a competitive league front.
It's clearly benefited United being out of Europe for a season, just giving them a bit of breathing space between fixtures to, implement tactics. Obviously, post Amorim departing, a much more simplified approach. But I think the reason they've managed to get this so right is because they've acquired Premier League ready footballers. Cunha, the match winner on this occasion, and Buemo in particular. But even Benjamin Sesko up front looks like he's got a bit about him. Wasn't his greatest performance on Saturday night, but I just simply do not trust Chelsea's senior leadership to learn from the lessons of United, who dunked on us 1-0 on Saturday night, and see what's worked for them and try and implement that and instill that at Stamford Bridge. I can only see endless PR briefs at the moment about a switching of tact in the strategy and an ambition to bring in experienced players now. But I think when it comes down to it, it's simply not going to happen. We're seeing bubbling rumors of random 16, 15-year-olds in Brazil still emanating through the transfer rumors. So I simply do not trust these guys to learn the lessons of United and others.
I think I read that we had 20 attempts on goal with just one shot on target. So whether that's a combination of, say, pure quality of chance creation or the actual ball striking or heading in circumstances itself, ultimately we're lacking quality at both the top end and the bottom end of the pitch. So I think United's XG was 0.29, but critically it was a really clean first time finish from Cunha, which I don't believe any of our players on that pitch would have taken. There's parallels with that Arsenal City game yesterday. I actually thought Arsenal put in a very competent showing, but ultimately it was the quality in both boxes that decided it. Cherki, Haaland, Bruno Fernandes, Cunha. These are the players that you spend the big money on, the match winners that ultimately define football matches. Yes, you need top quality at the other end of the pitch. Yes, you need players to control the game and set up chances. But in an increasingly stodgy, physical Premier League, it looks increasingly clear that clinicality is proving to be the difference.
I find it quite remarkable when you think about squad planning. Obviously, the narrative going into this game was Man United being hampered by a number of absentees in that centre back position, which resulted in them having obviously a fullback in Mazraoui deputising as a centre back and a young player, Aiden Heaven. So a centre back and a right back essentially. You look at Chelsea. I mean, we've only really got one senior centre back injury, which is obviously Colwell, who's a young player who we've missed greatly, but you look at our centre backs in this match, we've effectively got the same thing. We've got a Hato who's played fantastically, by the way, definitely deserves a shout out, and Wesley Fofana. I mean, between those two, it's a coin toss, really. Which one is better or worse? Mazraoui and Aiden Heaven or Fofana and Hato? There's not much in it, is there? That's just a result of one absentee for Chelsea. You mentioned the lack of quality at the front of the pitch. We've spoken about that at length, but the centre back situation is just utterly diabolical. And it's just a series of incompetent transfers, doubling down on the same strategy of trying to unearth these gems from France, Mamadou Sarr, Badiashile, Disasi, just never signing someone of the required quality and the required experience. Go and get me Harry Maguire in the summer. He's an imperfect centre back, but you know what job he's going to do for us. It's always a mystery for Chelsea, and it's resulted in this dreadful predicament we find ourselves in.
I think you're right to call out Jarell Hato for praise, but even he, I would argue, in the long term, is that going to be the answer at centre back for Chelsea? I thought it was brilliant.
Absolutely
Some
not.
really clean interceptions, tackles, last ditch challenges, very composed on the ball, line breaking passing. But for him to be a long term solution at centre back, it's going to have seriously ripe conditions and a perfectly tweaked lineup to compensate for his lack of aerial prowess and physicality.
He could be an Azpilicueta, a left centre back in a back three. I think that's the only condition in which he could play centre back, given his height. But I see him much more as a Nico O'Reilly, fluid, dynamic left back who can, move into midfield, tidy on the ball, break through those lines as you mentioned, or like a Timber for Arsenal, obviously with the opposite foot. I think that is his profile. I'm not quite sure amidst this current, injury crisis for Chelsea, we've ended up with Wesley Fofana and Joel Hatto as our centre back partnership. I mean, there are players on the bench on Saturday. Mamadou Sarr, who was being held as like the saviour in January when we recalled him, to a very controversial decision with the sister club Strasbourg. Trevor Chalobah was there, tossing. He's had his problems down the years, but there must be solutions in our ranks that is favourable to that partnership. I can't see any logic, and that ultimately sits with Liam Rosenior.
Modelled, disjointed thinking from board manager, medical room alike. The fact that Aiden Heaven is walking away from this match day with the man of the match performance, though, for me, tells you everything you need to know. Countless occasions, Chelsea in recent years fail to go for the jugular, identify certain weaknesses in opposition, and ultimately give centre backs very chilled outings. There's been talk Delap had better moments. Obviously, struck the bar, had a couple of occasions where he looked to threaten him behind, but realistically, he should have been having a field day here. I mentioned he scored one league goal. He's not scored in 20 games across all competitions now. He's just not cutting it. You just can't persist with him next season, can you?
Oh, absolutely not. I think it's done. I think he knows it's done. You can see a certain apathy and deadness behind his eyes when he did that interview with Pescek, which was a bit of a juxtaposition of two Chelsea eras there and then, right in front of you. So yeah, I don't think he'll be at Chelsea. We'll cut our losses. I think we can still recoup a fee for Delap. You can imagine Lampard having an interest in him for his promoted Coventry side. Millwall, if they come up through the playoffs, I think that could be a nice fit. We come back to the transfer policy. Who are these ready-made made players we can get next season to try and emulate this trajectory of Man United? Is it Ismaila Sarr from Crystal Palace to come and feature for us in a forward line? Is it John Paul Van Hecker at centre back? He's emerged as a leader of this resurgent Brighton team. I think Lacroix at the back as well for Crystal Palace. I think these are the kind of signings we simply have to make. Pay over the odds if you have to, give them a high salary, stop taking a gamble on rubbish.
I have to say, I want to congratulate ourselves for keeping our powder relatively dry on one man's performance on Saturday. Alejandro Garnacho entered the fray due to the misfortune of that Esteval hamstring injury just 15 minutes in. It was nothing short of a total disaster class from the Argentine, likened to Bakayoko versus Watford, Ziyech against Dinamo Zagreb. How did you see his performance, Ryan?
Not just his performance on Saturday, but I think Garnacho was a disaster in waiting that I think 99% of Chelsea fans saw coming. But ultimately, the despicable, incompetent sporting director, Paul Winstanley, felt he knew better. And there are obviously countless examples of players facing their old club and demonstrating a bit of a extra motivation to prove them wrong. Chelsea a bit on the receiving end of that many times. You think back to Kai Havertz in particular, Kovacic, even Mason Mount, who's never, I think, registered a goal or assist against Chelsea, has always looked motivated to try and stick it to us once again on Saturday night. Garnacho may have had that motivation, but ended up and proceeding to deliver a disaster class for the ages, as you've said, joining Bakayoko and Ziyech in the pantheon of all-time shocking performances. We've tried, I think, at times to dissect his game over recent weeks, and we've sort of landed on the notion that he thrives when there's space in behind. Often we've seen him perform against lower end opposition, likes of, Cardiff, Wrexham. I think Wolves at home, he had a pretty decent performance. I think it boils down to a very simple point. He simply does not have the ability to fulfill basic requirements of a winger. You think of, ball control, dribbling, agility, balancing, having a, shot. Countless examples of him on Saturday night just receiving the ball with space and dribbling pathetically into a Man United defender, dispossessed frequently, passing backwards and basically just bucking responsibility. And there are countless demonstrations now, and it's entirely consistent with what Man U fans were saying. This transfer is sheer ignominy for everyone involved from a Chelsea perspective. And I think it does expose the flawed nature of this supposed data-led approach that Chelsea sporting directors have presided over. And it's actually really interesting when you look at some of Garnacho's stats on paper from this match on Saturday that everyone is correctly deriding. 3 out of 6 dribbles completed, 2 passes completed, 21 ball carries, and 3 shots on goal. So in theory, on on a spreadsheet, that is a decent performance, but ultimately it's completely at odds with reality. And this is the cutting edge model, effectively, that we were told about. And this is what it amounts to: signing players based on a computer and a limited real world application of this data, which simply doesn't marry up with reality. And it comes back to Paul Winstanley, Lawrence Stewart. How many signings, you wonder, are attributed to this approach? You could easily identify Philip Jorgensen. They must have seen some statistics on his ball playing abilities and his distribution as a goalkeeper. Dario Asugo, I recall, had all these crazy, dispossession of opponents statistics when we signed him from, I think it was Sporting Lisbon on loan at Las Palmas. Badia Schill, there was all these stats I saw at the time around passing out the back and possessing this great technique on the ball. But ultimately, none of this marries up with the reality that we've seen and we're suffering now from as Chelsea fans. Garnacho is, I think, a disaster and ultimately a window into the wider failings of Chelsea's sporting recruitment.
I have to put my hands up and confess that at the time I semi bought into this idea of market opportunity, good value at, was it what, 40 million euros for Garnacho, parallels there with Liam Delap, buyout clause at 30. But ultimately, if you're trying to operate at the top level, trying to be an elite club, you need to be scouting elite players, not market opportunities. So this very much embodies the conflicting objective of this blue car ownership. Clearly, asset appreciation and resale value takes precedent over competing at the very top. But where they've got it so badly wrong, I feel in the case of Alejandro Garnacho, is that their model completely ignores the intangibles football. So the whole football world knew that Alejandro Garnacho carried baggage. There's talks of his younger brother being a socials ninja, leaking lineups, causing mutiny with tweets or insights that presumably have been relayed within the family. But the conditions needed to be absolutely right. You need a perfect culture, and I would argue an elite level manager to counteract the baggage that the likes of Garnacho carry. So his toxicity to really crack the whip and get him in order, you would need a Pep Guardiola or, as much as we criticised him, something akin to that cringe environment that Arteta has created. Constant reassertion that he needs to apply himself and stay within the parameters, the culture of the club. On the playing side, I remember decent performances from Garnacho, particularly against ourselves. We've discussed in the past, you often have a bias when a player performs well against you. I remember him bracing up at the bridge, that iconic celebration, followed by the glares after Cole Palmer turned the tide. But he is a player who, yes, thrives in broken water. He's needs space, the last man on a counter attack with Bruno Fernandes playing top draw passes in behind. And ultimately, in this possession-based, slow build-up football that perceivably the sporting directors and every manager they've employed since, bar Pochettino, wants to operate, his qualities are totally redundant. So I actually think he is Sterling light in a sense. So I think Sterling was criticised, lambasted at the bridge for his technical quality being exposed. He didn't have that space in behind. He wasn't making those persistent runs and being found by De Bruyne. Alejandro Garnacho is half the player, if that. But again, he had Bruno Fernandes creating chances. He had high lines in those big games where he was best deployed. You could argue Cole Palmer's drop off in form probably hasn't helped. Enzo Fernandez maybe not stepping up to that berth, that quality of long range passing that he was supposed to bring. But Garnacho could not be further suited from slow base, possession, tiki taka, recycle football that seems to be the collective mantra at the bridge.
I can't disagree with a single thing you've said there, but that doesn't excuse for me the sheer level of incompetence he displays when he receives the ball as an elite level winger. It's hard to fathom that someone who's got this far in his career, who's scored a goal at Wembley in the FA Cup, he's probably racked up 40 plus Champions League appearances, played for Argentina, doesn't seem to have the ability to literally just do a step over and run into space. It's beyond basic. I mean, I was watching the Ipswich game yesterday. I saw Jaden Philogene at left wing for Ipswich, player who's didn't quite cut it in the Premier League. He's got decent potential. He would look infinitely better at Chelsea as our left winger. I struggle to see many worse wingers, attackers in the Premier League. Is that a fair statement?
Playing devil's advocate, I would caveat with the fact that he is, 21 years of age, probably self-fulfilling, but there has been a media storm circling around him. I think you saw a BBC article the other day questioning what is going on with Garnacho. This kind of press and coverage does not extend to other players in the league, within the league. Obviously, he
He's a
played for
chaos
United,
magnet, isn't he?
biggest
Yeah.
biggest club around. It's a perfect storm that he's created off his own back, whether it's his brother fueling the fire, essentially an extension of him that he can't control. There's ultimately baggage there. He's pissed off the biggest club in the league that ultimately command a big presence within media coverage. There's journos of Manchester United fandom. So he's just like Sterling up against a media tsunami. But on top of that, he's engineered moves. How long did he waste under Amorim hedging for a move rather than, say, cracking on in crucial developmental years? I think his best season came when he was playing week in, week out charging around the pitch. And I actually thought his off the ball game was going to be a lot better than it is now.
It's been
So I
poor.
wonder whether that's come with ego. He used to fizz around the pitch, press, tackle, 90, 120 minutes, you name it. He seemed to be fittest on the pitch. That now seems to have exited his game, much like actually Sterling at the time at Chelsea. That off the ball, fizzing, continuous endless runs, pressing, etc., now seems to have deserted him. So whether that is the ego coming to the floor, he's got his big move, his big payday, his socials. Has he forgotten the basic elements that made him an effective player, if not a top technician?
It's a small point, but I think it doesn't help himself. He looks ridiculous. His bleached blonde hair. He looks like he's been bone maxing, looks maxing his face for the last 5 years. His tattoo on his neck saying, I don't know what it is. It's like it's not luck, it's God or something. Like fair play, it's religious statement. But the whole package you get with him, he looks ridiculous. He looks like a vampire. His first appearance for us in that bleach blonde hair against Brentford away. I just think the whole package just looks off.
Ryan Souness. No, I do think, as you say, if you're gonna quite literally highlight your own hair, you are asking for increased scrutiny. That's part and parcel. I remember a Soconomics chapter back in the day whereby flashy blonde players were more likely to be scouted. So it comes with the territory.
We've seen pretty concrete rumours now linking Garnacho with a departure in the summer. Alex Crook today from Talksport all but confirming that. Man is clearly in the know. Um, do you think that's right? Is it time to part ways and cut our losses there? Who would even sign him? I've seen links to River Plate amongst other Argentinian clubs.
In terms of a future, it looks unlikely to remain at the bridge. No doubt be pinned to a long term contract. And at the time, we mentioned market value. With that, you'd hope for resale. But I do wonder whether just that toxicity and the storm that constantly surrounds him wherever he goes, I mentioned leak lineups, etc., probably rules him out from any Premier League move in the near distant future. You are then, I guess, looking to Spain, back to Atletico Madrid.
See at
Probably
Sevilla.
feels a step above now. It could be. It reeks of a extended loan for me, and hope that he can somehow, again, at age just 21, rekindle some form, get his head back down, and show some value. And we can recoup a chunk of that 30-40 million pound outlay.
So I think we can write him off at this point as a disaster. Add that to other signings from last summer, Jamie Gittins, Delap, who are also going to be written off as, another mistake, move on to the next one. I guess my final point, my final question to end this is just where is the accountability in any walk of life? If I just throw the best part of 100 million away, probably more on these three players, there would be consequences. I would lose my job for that, demonstrating that level of incompetence. It just seems to be free reign at Chelsea to write off these errors and double, triple down on this strategy.
Time now for the opposition view. Up next for the Blues is Brighton at the Amex. So no respite for Rosenia as we return to the scene of last season's low. To preview this one, we've got a very special guest, Jack Stephenson of Brighton's leading podcast, Seagulls Social. Welcome, mate.
Hello, how are you? You good?
Good, thanks. Pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's a bit Chelsea Brighton's become a bit of like a big fixture these days, which it never really used to be as much, did it? So it's interesting.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
Jorginho Ruter's equaliser at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium was undoubtedly special for the neutral. But how are we feeling as a Brighton fan? Business end of the season, April 2026.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of end to the season. We sort of find ourselves in a really good position considering that we had a huge slump, didn't we, in the middle of the season where it looked like we might, I think there were calls for the manager's heads. I mean, in my personal opinion, he was probably one game away from me losing, me going like fully, yeah, I don't think he's the right man for the job. And he's turned it around since then. It's now, I think it's 5 wins in the last 6 or 7, with a draw and a loss to Arsenal in there. And yeah, we put ourselves in a really good position, and it's so tight, the Premier League this year, because I mean, luckily this weekend every result went our way. I don't think I've ever seen that. Like, it's normally, one of these weekends where, we've had plenty of weekends where every result has gone against us, but I've yet to see one where pretty much every result went for us. And we put ourselves in a position where a win against Chelsea will send us sixth, and then, we're only a little bit further up to fifth, but it blows the season wide open, but it's going to be a tough test as well. Like, Chelsea have been in poor form, but they've still got top quality in that side.
I think it's been well documented that we are now on the worst run in the whole English football pyramid.
Yeah, not great that.
But yeah, somehow still holding on to sixth. Champions League looks long gone, and we're very much now looking downwards. I guess our take on Brighton. So you mentioned Hertzler potentially under pressure, but our sort of feeling would be that it is Tony Bloom's club. Feels as if it's been irrespective of manager, constant churn of players, top players leaving once again in the summer, the likes of João Pedro, Estepinian, replaced with, I guess, football manager regens, as we call it. Welbeck obviously aging like a fine wine in amongst that.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I think probably a little bit. Well, number one, Estepinian was not very good last season, so I think him going it was a weird one. Like, a lot of the football sort of media sphere thought, oh, it's a massive loss for Brighton, and I loved Estepinian when he was good, but it was the right time for him to move on. In terms of like the churn of players, I think it's frustrating maybe a little bit from a Brighton fan's perspective to think that, like, you get to the end of every season, you're like, right, if we keep the squad together, we can do really good things next season, and every season someone moves on. I think that's just the reality of being a club of our size. I think if you sort of take a step backwards, you know, football, the money in football is insane now. Like, and it's almost unsustainable. And yeah, there's a little bit of frustration in me that, like, we can be a sustainable football club, because I think we've only had, like, I think there's only one Premier League club maybe who made a profit this year, or one, and that was us, and that's a really good achievement, but it's not going to win you trophies. And I think when we look at our friends up the road at Crystal Palace, a little bit, a club of a similar size, maybe slightly bigger, um, they're winning trophies. They seem to be able to retain players for maybe a little bit longer, but then they're struggling with that now. They never quite had those sort of superstars like Caicedo, who sort of went for the 100 millions. I think the only one where they sort of had a superstar player was Elise, and he was sold pretty swiftly, and he's proved that he's probably one of the best players in the world right now. So yeah, it's a little bit frustrating in that sense, but the churn of players is always going to happen, and there is a food chain in football, and we're not at the top of that food chain. So I think it's a reality we have to accept. And I think we're going to have some departures this summer, because it looks like Van Heck's not signing a new contract. So there's a little bit of frustration that if we don't get Europe, that we won't be able to retain these players. But at the same time, when we got Europe last time, we got in Europa League, we still lost Caicedo and McAllister. So I don't think it has too much of effect. It is all about money at the end of the day, really.
I think it's a serious testament to the model and the recruitment that you keep going again. You keep being competitive despite these wholesale changes. So we mentioned João Pedro leaving in the summer. I think most Chelsea fans would agree he's probably been our player of the season. You touched upon Moises Caicedo. He's probably been our player of the last 2 seasons. But the Chelsea parallels do not end there. So our model is often touted the Brighton model.
Yeah.
You've got Paul Winstanley at the helm on the sporting director front. Be great to get your take on the current circus that is Chelsea FC.
Yeah, I think the reason that it works with us, the Brighton model, is because of, like, our size of club and the way that we work. We can buy, hundreds of players for 100 grand, let's say, because for every hit that we've had, we've also we've also had a lot of misses. For every Moises Caicedo, we had a Tudor Beluta or a Henrik Bjordal. These are players you've never heard of, but cost over £1 million. Anders Dreyer, stuff. He's playing the MLS now. He's actually doing quite well, and all of them have decent careers. But when you bring that model to a club like Chelsea, the fees are a lot more scrutinised, and you see them. Chelsea are paying like, I think it's Diarcy and who's now left, and so many of these players moved on, and the guy who stole off us, like, his name completely escapes me. He went on loan to Burnley. Was it Fofana? And when you have those fees, it just doesn't quite translate, and the scrutiny builds a lot more. And at the end of the day, like, we're a very slow burning football club. This model that we put in, it was a success over to get the Europa League for us was a success over 5 or 6 seasons with time under Potter, and then De Zerbi was the one who just kind of almost supercharged it and finished it off. And for a club like us, that's really good because we're smaller. But for a club like Chelsea, like, I don't think some of our fans probably don't even realize it. Like, Chelsea is a pressure cooker environment. Like, you're there to win trophies. Abramovich gave you you were one of the most, if not the most successful club in Europe at that time, winning titles, winning trophies. And maybe that isn't quite what the owners have built a platform for, and a lot of these players need time. And that's not really what Chelsea expect, and rightly so to a certain extent. Like, you're one of the biggest clubs in London. You're expected to win trophies, and maybe not like every year, and you can have the odd, season where you've got to rebuild or transition season. And it just seems that after all this time, it's sort of is boiling over a bit. And I don't know whether it's because of the American owners sort of looking at an American model of, this is about making money rather than trophies, and bringing players and moving on players, and the transfer and asset of players, especially with everything going on with Strasbourg as well, which is all quite strange. It looks like potentially one of our former players is now moving on from Strasbourg back to Chelsea in Barco, who looks a very good player, but did absolutely nothing for us. So I don't know exactly where he's come from, but yeah, it's quite a bizarre model. And I mean, if I was a Strasbourg fan, I'd just be fuming. Like, the 100-year-old football institution is basically being used as was essentially like a glorified NFL farm club for Chelsea. And at the end of the day, that's not Chelsea. And I'm sure if the situation was reversed, most Chelsea fans would be pretty irritated by that situation. So, and then Paul Winstanley being the sporting director, I think is interesting because I don't think he's the key to what was good at Brighton. The key what was good at Brighton was Sam Jewell, who was the one who discovered players like Caicedo, McAllister, all the South American gems that we sort of had over those years. Was not so much Winstanley. Winstanley was more behind, the transfers of like Tom Ahmed back in the Championship. So it did just sort of seem like Bowley was just trying to get anyone involved at Brighton, not realizing who are the key workers within that situation. Eventually, he did get it, Sam Jewell, because I would say our recruitment has not quite been the same since Sam Jewell's departure. So it's very strange. Yeah, and Winstanley doesn't seem very well liked within the Chelsea fan base.
I think that's an understatement. You make some depressingly great points. I think the relative stature of the clubs, you referenced the fact that obviously Chelsea are going to face inflated fees for signing similar ilk of player, but also that scrutiny, that spotlight. So that run of form that Hertzler presided over earlier in the season, we're now seeing similar with Rosenia, and it very much now looks like he's almost at the point of no return, that ultimately he cannot lead us into the upcoming season. It is very much the thinking of the fan base. And even earlier, your assertion that Palace with Elise and probably Brighton with Caicedo, that's one world-class elite player from both outfits that's ready for that top level, despite that conveyor belt of really strong Premier League performers. The level that Chelsea purport to be competing at requires the elite. So ultimately, the probability of landing those elite players from the data-driven, slightly left field insights, that those finds is going to be very few and far between. You imagine, obviously, your world-class players, your Mbappe's, your Messi, from an early age, they're on everyone's radar. It's no secret that a good chunk of those elite players are going to be elite. Of course, there are these gems that crop up here and then, but even signing 15, 20 players a season, you're not going to guarantee that you're landing those one or two players of a generation, you'd argue.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is actually Chelsea have nicked one of our. Uh, I think he'd only made a few first team appearances for Chelsea, but Shim Mweka. He was, he was hotly tipped at Brighton to go on to be like our sort of world class talent. So maybe that's one who's in the conveyor bit, but that's something that goes very under the radar because I'm sure most Chelsea fans just imagine him as a Chelsea youth product. But he
Bang,
came from Brighton, and
bang on the
he
head
came through
again.
our academy. Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
like,
he's
yeah,
cited often as Cobham's next greatest
mm,
product. Banging in goals left, right, and centre
yeah, and
in under 21s football. Remains to be seen if we'll make that next step. But say at least that's positive to hear, at least from our
oh yeah,
side, that you're hot on him.
Oh, I mean that was. I mean, I know because I watch quite a lot of the under 21 games, and there's a few people who who associate with scouting and stuff, and I have a chat with them every now and then, and they were like, I think Brighton were gutted to lose Shim, but that was also just like the way that Chelsea, they're a huge club with a lot of resources, and maybe it goes not to go too much to the Abramovich stuff, but the sort of, with the transfer bans, they were definitely hoovering up talent. Whether Cobham is the right place for these players to nurture is the next question, because plenty of players with a lot of talent just haven't been able to perform at certain levels when they go into that Chelsea environment. Whereas you look at some of the players like Caicedo, would Caicedo have been the same player if he went straight to Chelsea, or did those years where we loaned him to Beershot, played him at Brighton, got him up to that level, make him a much better player? Who's to see?
Great points once again.
Yeah.
Not only is that pathway more congested, but also now you've got an ownership that are realistically looking at these players as pure profit opportunities. So,
Yeah.
game thick and fast upcoming tonight,
Yeah.
8 p.m. at the Amex. I am reluctantly headed to this one.
Mhm.
Safe to say Chelsea fans aren't positive. We're on a
Yeah.
record run of failing to score, let alone losing run.
Yeah.
Let's have your prediction for this one tonight.
Yeah, it's. I always get nervous playing Chelsea because I think until we beat you at the Bridge, and the season we got Europe, we'd never beaten Chelsea in our history. I think in the league, so it was a bit of a game where you were suddenly like, oh no, what's going to happen here? I think we go into it with good form, but like in our good form, we've been efficient. I wouldn't say we've been outstanding. We got a point at Tottenham. I didn't think we were at our best, and Tottenham were at their very best, and they still couldn't win, which is ironic in itself. So, and we played Burnley, and we only won 2-0, and that was literally a game where we never even exited first gear. Like Burnley are that rubbish. And that's no, well, it is disrespect to Burnley. Like I had a conversation with someone last night who was saying there's no bad teams in the Premier League, and it was like, no, Burnley are pretty rubbish. Uh, and we sort of didn't really have to work for that. We sort of scored one just before half time and one just before full time, 1-2-0. Pretty straightforward win. So there maybe is a little bit of an element of we're sort of due a bad result because we're not quite playing teams off the park, but we have got. I think it's finally starting to come together for Hersler in that he likes players who work hard. That's it really. Like he just wants players who work really hard together, and the players are working really hard for him. So it'd be interesting to see that, like how he gets on tonight. My prediction: I'm gonna go for 2-1 Brighton. I'll be positive. I've predicted you to score, so that's a surprise in itself, isn't it?
I think I will. I'll take a goal as consolation
Yeah.
tonight. Something to cheer at the
Well,
Amex.
it depends if Robert Sanchez is in goal because well, look, I'm gonna get
We haven't
mugged
even
off
gone
here
there yet.
probably. Yeah, before the game, but he'll probably have an amazing game. But Robert Sanchez is a player who I've never been very impressed with. As soon as he's gone to Chelsea, he was okay at Brighton when he first came in. He was very good, but he completely lost it. And when he went, he was not a loss.
It's safe to say he very much divides
Yeah.
/ drives fury from the Chelsea fan base. Say, glad to hear you predicted a goal for us. I'm going to try and be positive, and say that we will score 2. One
Yeah.
man, however, Danny Welbeck, seems to become R9 reincarnate every time I see him, without fail, whether he starts on the bench or from the get-go,
Yeah.
seems to score against the Blues. So I'm going to call a 1-1 draw with Welbeck
Yeah.
scoring, and I'm going to pray for a wicked deflection or something
Yeah.
alike needed for us to
Well, I think it was,
finally right the wrongs.
was it last year Cole Palmer scored that ridiculous goal, put you 1-0 up, where it sort of bounced off Verbruggen's face or something and went into the side netting. It wasn't exactly
Oh,
the
well,
best goalkeeping
I'll take
I've ever
that
seen.
again from Cole
Yeah.
Palmer, who again is woefully out of form and
Yeah, it's
miles
bizarre
off,
that, isn't it?
though,
Yeah.
miles off those 4 goals he scored against Brighton
Yeah.
a couple of seasons
Yeah.
ago. Enjoy
Yeah.
the game tonight, mate. Hopefully
Thank you
not too
very
much.
much.
And
Yeah.
pleasure. Thanks again for
Yeah.
getting involved.
Thank you. Enjoy your trip to the Amex. Well, and again, hopefully not too much.
All the best for the rest of the season. Have a good one,
Yes, all
mate.
the best.
Cheers. Bye.